Okay, we're at 5 past the hour, so I think we can begin. Um, my name is Shazia Ibrahim, and I know most of you know me. I am the co-facilitator of the communications working group at the CJC, and I'm also part of the secretariat. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Stella Hertantyo from ACA's Writing Circle. So Stella is the Strategic Communications and Storytelling Manager at the African Climate Alliance. You may have heard of the African Climate Alliance because they do fantastic youth work. And of course, they're part of the CJC, they're a member organization. So I'd like to give Stella a very, very warm welcome. Stella, do you want to say something before I go to housekeeping?
No, just really excited to be here. And from the chat, I think there's a lot of good questions coming through already.
Amazing. So just to go over some quick housekeeping rules, this workshop is an hour and a half, and we want everybody to get a chance to speak, but we don't want it to get too chaotic. So I'm going to ask if you could please stay on mute for the duration of Stella's presentation. There is going to be a Q&A session at the end, so save your questions for then. But if you have any questions of clarification or that kind of a thing, please put it on the chat. And Gabriel and I will be monitoring the chat to make sure that we field those questions to Stella. And then lastly, also don't worry if you miss anything or something goes over your head, maybe, because we are recording the session and we're going to put it on our YouTube page, which I will share in the chat. ACA also has like a number of resources, recorded resources that we can share with you after this as well. So hopefully that will work to your advantage. But otherwise, let me not take up too much time and hand over to Stella.
Thank you so much, Shazia. And thank you so much for having me in the space today. I'm really excited for today's session, and writing is something I'm really passionate about. So, love that I get to speak about it at length. And today we're here to learn about how to write a strong op-ed. We'll get into what an op-ed is in a moment. It's just a type of article. And these are based, the presentation is based on learnings from the African Climate Alliance Writing Circle. And I think that you've all been checking in the chat already, but if you would like to continue doing so, it's nice to see your name, where you're calling in from, and what is one thing you hope to walk away from the session with. I can't promise that I'll get to absolutely all of the things you want to walk away with. There's a lot to get through, and I could talk about this for many days. But this workshop is really tailored towards people that want to give op-ed or article writing on social and environmental justice topics a go, where to start, how to formulate a strong article, how to pitch, how to edit, all of those step-by-step procedures in terms of turning your idea into something that other people can read and engage with and learn more about the subject you're covering. So once you had a chance to check in the chat, I just wanted to just quickly introduce myself. So as Shazia said, my name is Stella. I work at the African Climate Alliance in the communications team, and at the African Climate Alliance, we work with young people. We are a youth-led, movement-based grassroots organization acting and advocating for Afrocentric climate justice. I know that's a lot of words, but it's just to say that we work with a network of over 1,000 young people across the continent in around 20 African countries, using different methods to inspire youth to take climate action. And we really believe that there are many different ways to take climate action, which is why the Writing Circle came about. So about a year and a half ago, we created the Writing Circle, which is really a working group that is open to members who are part of our youth activist network. And it's a space where we gather from with people from across the continent, young people who are interested in writing on climate justice related topics or learning how to write on these topics as well and shaping these narratives together. It's a very collaborative space, and it's a small group of us that meet regularly. So to write one article, it takes us 4 weeks. We meet once a week, one evening a week for 4 full weeks, going all the way from brainstorming to research, to drafting, to editing, and then to pitching. And so far in the past year and a half, we have published and written 3 articles, and we have just this week finished our 4th one. So that will hopefully be published soon. And Gabriel reminded me earlier that op-eds are actually a very long part of African Climate Alliance's history. Like I said, we like to encourage many different ways of engaging in climate action. And from the start of our organization, roughly 6 years ago, we have had young people gathering, sometimes on Sunday evenings, to come together, share their ideas, and turn them into articles. So it's a big part of our the way that we advocate and shift the climate narrative towards one that is more human-centered. So you might be wondering, I'm using this word op-ed quite a lot. What actually is it? And Shazia and Gabriel, if there are any clarifying questions, please just interrupt me because it's a little bit hard to keep up with the chat. But yes, an op-ed is just a type of article, and I'm sure that we can all think of an article that we've read that has changed our mind or inspired us in some way or made us aware of something that we didn't know before. And an op-ed is just a type of article that exists in the media that does not have to be written by a formal journalist or writer, but can rather be written by a member of the public, a member of an organization of civil society, who wants to have their views and experiences, typically lived experiences, expressed and represented in the media. The reason it's called an op-ed is because the longer version of that is opinion editorial. So opinion because it's an expressed opinion, it's something that's based on your thoughts and experiences, and editorial because when these first came about, they were published in a specific part of the news paper next to the editor's page, where typically people from the public weigh in or share their thoughts on a particular topic. But now that's not as relevant. Opinion editorials or op-eds are published widely across news media, and because we don't use a lot of print media anymore, usually it's online in online publications. So it's just a type of article that creates a space for opinion and a type of article that creates a space for our perspectives that often aren't shared in the mainstream news to be seen by a wider audience. And that brings me to what they are used for, and that's exactly that. I think we can all recognize in the climate space that often our movements, our perspectives, the things that we care about are not represented well enough in mainstream media. The stories of our communities, what the realities are on the ground, and the types of topics that we think would actually challenge the powerful and bring about change are not represented in the way that we want them to be. And so op-eds become a space for us to draw on our lived experiences and subject matters that help us connect the dots between these big systemic issues and what's actually happening on the ground. For example, maybe there is a factory in your area that is polluting a lot and affecting young people, and often an op-ed writer has more control over what is published than if the view was being reflected by a journalist. So because you live in the community, and I saw Simpiwe, I think it was, in the chat saying you're interested in writing because you believe that you are able to represent your community's experience much better than anybody else. And that is fully true. So you live there, you know the people that are affected by these issues, you are able to represent them in a much more honest way than if a journalist had to come in from another area and ask questions and try to do that work from there. So op-eds are really, really used for public people, activist organizations, civil society organizations to make room in the media for our perspectives to be heard and our narratives to be shifted. And just a few examples of what this means, because I've been speaking a lot now as well. These are a couple or 3 examples of op-eds that we have written in the past while, I think over the past probably 2 years, just a couple of the op-eds we've published, just so you can get an idea of the types of articles that I'm talking about. And I think Shazia will put links in the chat to these if you want to actually read them. But just from the titles, you can see that the first one was really all about human rights defenders in the climate movement. This was specifically related to the Stop EA COP campaign. And at that moment in time, there were a lot of arrests and police brutality towards human rights defenders who were a part of the Stop EA COP campaign. And we wrote an op-ed responding to that moment and talking about the importance of ensuring safety for those people who are defending environmental and human rights. The second one in the middle, we wrote with the writing circle at the end of last year on why COP29's money talk matters to you. A lot of what happens in the youth space in the climate movement is big words, complicated topics, very particular ways that young people are excluded from these conversations. And we wanted to write a response to COP29's theme, which was the finance COP, and talk about why the finance COP actually matters to the everyday person and to a young person. So we wrote in response to that moment. And the third one is a recent one that we published because we, at the end of last year, heard that we were victorious in a court case that we were a part of called the Cancel Coal campaign, which was the first climate change court case led by youth against the South African government. We were challenging the inclusion of new coal in our country's energy planning. And one of the biggest questions that we got asked during that court case was, what about the jobs? Does it mean that you don't care about people's livelihoods and you're challenging new coal, but that means that people are going to lose jobs? What about that? And so we wrote an op-ed talking about the need for jobs and job creation to be addressed in South Africa's energy transition, what kinds of jobs can be created, how many, what this actually means for our future. So as you can see, all three of these were responding to a moment in time that we felt that the narratives and the stories that were being told were not actually reflecting all of the realities. And we felt that as young people, we really wanted to have a say on these matters. And I think that's exactly why it was the right time for us to write an op-ed. I don't think that you need to worry that you're not a journalist, that you're not somebody who has years of media experience, years of writing experience. The most important thing when thinking about whether you want to write an op-ed is if you have a good connection to your own experience and the world around you. And a lot of the time when we think about what we want to write about, it comes from that moment when you're like, that doesn't sound quite right, or it feels like this isn't being talked enough or not about enough, or the wrong things are being talked about too much. And I think that questioning within yourself is exactly where the most brilliant articles start. For example, I remember that Uncle Sunny a couple of days ago shared in the CJC group chat talking about how we do need to connect the dots more between the climate movement and the activists on board the Madeleine that was sailing towards Gaza to break the aid blockade, and how these are both connected to humanitarian crises. And when I was preparing for the session, I thought that's a really perfect example of somebody realizing it feels like there's dots that can be connected. It feels like there's a gap that we can speak to actually show greater solidarity and greater connection between causes, and actually try and reach audiences that maybe weren't paying attention enough before. And that kind of questioning and curiosity is what makes the basis of a good article. So why are you the right person to actually write an op-ed? It's because you're the expert of your own experience, which is the basis of where it starts, and also because you care about an issue affecting the environment or your community. You have or will, through research, have an informed perspectives on the topic that you want to write about. So it doesn't mean that you have to know everything there is to know at the beginning. Research is a huge part of the writing process. Thirdly, you're willing to practice your writing skills, and then you have access to a community who can help you on your writing journey. One of the most important things about an op-ed is that it's mostly collaborative, or in the way that we have written them at ACA, they have mostly been collaborative. So we write and brainstorm with a group of people, we draft, we edit with a group of people, we polish the article, make sure that there are many different perspectives included. And we have found that that helps us create an article that is, one, applies to many more people. So because there's so many perspectives, a lot of people can relate to it, but also makes that we aren't forgetting things. There's more bases we've covered, more interesting angles. So it helps to have a community who can help you, even if it's just reading it to your brother, your sister, a friend who can say, have you considered this angle, or doing a bit more research on that. And I think the CJC is also a great space to be able to share any drafts that you have for feedback and for support on those things too. And then lastly, you're the right person because you're committed to factual writing and ethical use of other people's stories. So we're not always going to be writing from I experienced this, and so I think I want to write about this. Sometimes it's something we've observed in the world, in our broader community, in our schools, in our organizations that we want to write about. And when we write on stories that aren't particularly our own, we do need to make sure that we are representing people fairly, that they are aware that the topics are being covered, and we're doing thorough research to make sure that we are not using other people's stories unethically or skewing facts or spreading misinformation. There are still things to consider around that. Okay, so now we know what an op-ed is. It's a type of article that expresses an opinion. It's a space for us to challenge narratives in the mainstream media. And we know why we are all capable of doing it, because we all have distinct perspectives that we want to get across. And now I wanted to just go through what are some of the qualities of a strong op-ed. And we do have on the African Climate Alliance's YouTube channel a series of tutorials. It's 3 tutorials on this. So if you want to go afterwards and learn more about this, then that's where you can go. But there are 8 qualities of a very strong op-ed article. The first is that it has a defined topic and like a main argument. So, for example, if we go back to that example I used a bit earlier on pollution and air pollution, so a clearly defined topic might be that we're writing about how is air pollution affecting children in a specific area. And then it also needs to link to a specific theme. So on this topic, the theme might be that environmental damage affects young people differently to how it affects adults, and these impacts are often unseen due to the experiences of adults being more dominant in the media. This is an example that is quite specific to African Climate Alliance, obviously because we work with young people, and young people are very often sidelined from media representation for many reasons we can get into, but there needs to be a specific theme that supports your topic, and that makes people want to read more. Because as I've been saying, the standout point about an op-ed is that it responds to a moment, a lack, a narrative, a connection of dots. And then the next point of a strong op-ed is that it expresses a clear opinion and advocates for certain actions. So often when we write on these experiences of ours or what we've noticed in the world, it's actually because we want people to take some kind of action, even if that action is just to care more about a topic we feel is important and that people aren't actually paying attention to. So when we do think about the opinion we're trying to get across and the action we want people to take, we do have to think about what we want that to be so that we're writing an effective article. So, for example, in this case, perhaps we want policymakers to acknowledge the social impact and environmental damage of air pollution that affect people of different ages in different ways, and we need policies to actually be able to reflect this awareness and provide children and their caregivers with the necessary support. Um, and also to monitor and implement that these policies are effective. So that's just an example of the type of call to action or the type of action that we want somebody to take, ideally after reading this article. Another important quality of a strong op-ed is to have a clear target audience in mind. And I saw quite a few of you in the chat mentioning you're interested in learning about how to reach the ideal audience. This is always something that's a work in progress, because you can never absolutely ensure that the perfect person that you want to read your article is going to read it, but this comes down a lot to the type of publication you decide to pitch the article to, who reads that publication, and also making sure that the way that you frame your article has that person in mind. So if you're talking specifically to policymakers, maybe you're going to talk more about the gaps in policy that you feel need to be filled. But if you're talking more to somebody who you want to may not know anything about the topic and you want to educate them, maybe you're going to start first from the basics of what is the context of air pollution in South Africa, what causes it, all of those types of things. So when you think about a specific target audience, this really informs your tone, the angle that you use, and we'll talk a bit more about angle in a moment. Tone just means the type of words and how you tell the story. Obviously, we hope that everybody in the world will read our articles. So that's kind of a given. We want it to be a wide-reaching piece, but when we're writing, it's very important to not just think, I want the general public to read this, because then you won't have a very strong argument to make. So you won't be writing with a specific person in mind, and the likelihood that it will even reach that person is very low. So I always say that it's best to have one person in mind and hope that it reaches many more people outside of that, because it's a strong article than the other way around. And I think the thing is, if it does reach that person, they're likely to share it, and it's likely to be spread more widely than if you're just reaching for a very general audience. So, for example, in the one that I shared, the target audience might be decision makers or municipal, provincial, national government, because we're looking at air pollution and the way that we want policymakers to respond to these realities. The next point is that you have to make sure that your writing is clear and to the point. I think a tendency that we have in this movement is to try and tackle too many problems or too many topics at once, because we're all very passionate people and we know that everything is connected. But for an effective article, we need to try our best to try and focus on one, two, max three. Three is even quite hard topics in an article, because otherwise we'll lose our readers. We can always write another article or do a follow-up on that one, but to try and tackle too many things at the same time will often confuse people and our message will be diluted. The next point that I mentioned earlier is that it has to be backed by research. Even if it's your own lived experience, there does need to be a level of research, even if that research is speaking to other people around you. You have to situate your lived experience or personal story within a broader context so that somebody reading understands why this actually applies to a broader community, or somebody that's not just one single person and their own life experience. Um, I think it's really, really powerful to start and have op-eds that focus on a very specific example. For example, in this air pollution topic, it would be very powerful to bring in the story of how this has affected one person specifically. I'm thinking about our Cancel Coal case, and we heard a lot about how children living in coal mining areas often suffer asthma, cannot go to school. They start having worries about whether they're going to be left behind from their peers. They have to go to hospital a lot. It actually prevents them from being able to get certain work. So those kinds of very human stories really do matter for a strong article. And to get people's attention and to get people to care, but it does still mean that research is important, because making false claims or spreading misinformation can also be really dangerous. Yeah, and I've already spoken about the importance of lived experience. I think that's I've spoken about that a lot. So just to say that anchoring the article in a lived experience is really, really key to a powerful article. The most difficult part about an op-ed is often keeping it concise and short. So a lot of publications prefer op-eds that are under 1,000 words, and that may seem like a lot of words right now, but it goes really quickly when you're writing and connecting many dots. So I think that trying to edit down and edit after you've written, a lot of people underestimate how long that's going to take. But it is actually one of the harder parts of a writing process and equally as important. And in this, trying to keep it short and concise just means that it's as short and as easy to understand as can be. You also always need to be asking yourself, does this make sense to the audience I'm trying to reach? Have I tried to change any big words to ones that are more understandable? Does it flow well? So I'm not just jumping from um, a personal story of somebody affected by air pollution to calling the government, talking specifically about like policy. There's a clear story that's being told between each piece. So yeah, that's kind of the 8 qualities of a strong op-ed. It needs to hit all of these points, and usually in the writing circle, even when we're brainstorming in our first session, we're just sharing ideas. I usually put these 8 points on the screen and we use it as a brainstorming guide. So we start typing under each of these points, and then we move from there so that we know that we're not trying to work backwards. So I think having this on a Google Doc, and then when you're planning your article, actually typing under each of these is a really good practical way to do it. Okay, you've heard me speaking a lot about an angle or a hook or a story, and there is a reason for this. It's because these are the tools we use to get people interested in even reading about our article in the first place. And I think if we are to go back to the examples that I shared earlier, these ones, each of them, when I was explaining, I explained the moment in time that they were responding to. So we were responding to the brutality and unfair sentencing of human rights defenders and environmental defenders at the time. We were responding then to COP29 and the fact that it was focusing on finance, but young people really didn't know much about that. And then the third one, we were responding to this deep concern that many people hold, which is not unfounded, about whether moving away from coal will affect development and jobs. So each of those, I was naming what we call a news hook. It's basically just how do we frame the article that it's linked to something specific and important right now that the news media will care about and pick up on, and people will want to read about because they're currently learning about things that are similar, or reading articles that are similar in content, and this brings a new idea or a new angle. So a news hook is just the main question your article aims to answer and what draws the reader in. And it really should be clear from the first paragraph of the article, because if you don't grab the reader at the top, you'll lose them forever. And I think we can all relate to this when you start reading an article and you actually can't tell what is it about. Your attention span is much shorter, and so we often don't give the writer 5 paragraphs to actually tell us what it's about. We want to know from the beginning, what am I going to read about? Why should I care? And then you continue reading more into the article. So yeah, it could be a recent event. It could be a new trend. It could be something that has just happened in the news. It could be something that has happened in your community and hasn't been published in the news, and you want to say people should know about this. And like I've been saying, it really provides a reason for the story to be covered now rather than at any other time. And this is also important not just to get people to care, but for when you're pitching your article to the media so they know why they should publish it. Because pitching is a lot about arguing why it's important for this piece to be published at this moment instead of in 2 months or in 2 weeks or last week, even, because sometimes these ideas aren't relevant anymore. Um, and I think there are many different things that you can look out for, different kinds of hooks. So, for example, a big event could be like the African mining indaba that you want to provide a different perspective on. Often, if policies are up for review and you're writing a submission, you can write an op-ed explaining why you are wanting a specific kind of person's voice to be heard in those policies. If an announcement is made by government, if there are specific important days in the year. So, for example, maybe Youth Day, you want to write an op-ed specifically around Youth Day and what that means this year, or a historic moment. So it doesn't always have to be like a newsworthy something that happened in the news that you saw. It can be a big event, a policy, an important day. So it doesn't, yeah, it's not limiting, but it's always good to have a very specific angle that you're coming in with when you're writing. Like I said, a news hook should always have a narrative. A narrative just means a story, because it's not enough to just tell people this is what you should do or this is why you should care. Story to guide people through why you're connecting the dots and what this means for their own lives. Okay, so this is just to summarize what I've been saying and bring it all together. I've talked a lot about the different elements of a strong op-ed, but like, what does this look like when you're writing an article in practice? So it just means that you're going to start with a very strong introduction and the news hook. So we just spoke about that. What is the thing that you want to catch people's eyes with, that they can remember, that gets them to care, and that needs to be mentioned in the introduction. So, for example, if you're writing about COP or you're writing about the mining Indaba, you cannot mention that 5 paragraphs in. Start that with that in the introduction, why somebody should care. Then in the next few paragraphs, you're going to add research and context. So um, for example, if we're going to back to the air pollution example, you want to research what are the main causes of air pollution in South Africa? Is this linked to the fossil fuel industry? Have people been speaking about it? Are there policies around it? What does the constitution say? Things like that. It's important to not just base it on your own assumptions, but also go and look, what have other people been saying? Are there reports on this? Have other people been writing about this and people still don't care? It really helps to contextualize what you're writing about. And then after you've given some background, some research, some context, you're going to weave in a personal or lived experience. What this does is it humanizes all of that research and context that you've given, and really makes it kind of a lot more close to home, because people can actually imagine a person or a place or a community that is actually dealing with this issue. And then lastly, you'll end with a compelling conclusion or call to action. Earlier, I spoke about the importance of op-eds often trying to encourage somebody to do something, take some kind of action, whether that be to join a movement or for a policymaker to create a new policy, or even it's just for people around you to learn more about something. Your conclusion does need to end with some kind of very strong call to action of what you want people to take away from this article. And all of this needs to link to the introduction. So you can't start saying something in your introduction, and then by the end of the article, you are saying something entirely opposite. Each piece of your article does need to link to one another. Okay, how are we doing? Are there any clarifying questions so far? I
I
don't
see
see any
nothing
in
in the
the
chat yet. People, if you do have any questions for clarity, you're more than welcome to just pop it in the chat. Any bigger questions are also welcome to go into the chat. But I think, Stella, you've been doing a great job so far explaining it in detail. So no questions is a good sign. Thanks.
Okay, I feel like I'm not used to speaking so much, so I hope I'm making sense. But yes, now we have our article draft. And again, as Shazia said, you can come back to this later and take notes from the slides of the formulas and all of that. But we have now, we are at the stage where we have a draft. For us at the writing circle, the editing stage will be the fourth session, the third or fourth session. So when I tell you that writing is not just, it's often not a quick process, I really mean it. It sometimes can take days or weeks for things to actually come together. And Glenn, I see your question. I think I'm going to save it for the end so that we can have a discussion about it. But I've noted it. Yeah, so this is not a very fast process because you want to make sure that you're doing each step really well, all the way from coming up with your idea to doing the research to writing a draft to writing a second draft, then to editing, and then to creating a final draft. So often we are 3 weeks into the process by the time we get to this editing step, which we use this 10-step guide to editing. And like I said, the editing process is just as important as the writing process, because here you get a chance to figure out what is the most important information to include that people will actually want to read my article and that they won't get bored, that they'll keep their attention, all of that. So the first step is to read for flow. Check if the op-ed reads smoothly and makes sense from start to finish. For this step, I really think it's useful to get somebody else involved. And in this case, you're welcome to send it to the coalition or to Shazia. And it helps to have another pair of eyes over what you have written, because often you've been writing and researching for weeks, and to you, you're like, you know so much, but you maybe know too much in the sense that you're not then reading it from the perspective of somebody who doesn't know much about it and is going to read this article for the first time and try to learn something. So in the past, I've given articles I've written to a friend, to a colleague, just to say, like, could you read over this for a moment? Tell me if it actually makes sense and that the paragraphs flow well. And then the second point is to review your introduction and your conclusion. You need to make sure that the beginning is really interesting, because that is where you get people's attention, and you need to make sure that the ending is really interesting, because that is what people will walk away with. And remember, these paragraphs are also very important because they summarize the main points of your article. That's because somebody needs to know from the first paragraph what are they going to be reading about. And the last part of the paragraph, the last part of the article, they need to just be reminded of the main points that were covered. The third thing to check for when you're editing is to check your language and your tone. It's really important to be using respectful language, to be maintaining a very consistent tone, so you aren't speaking to one type of person in one paragraph, policymaker that uses very big language, and in the next type of paragraph, you're speaking to a young person who maybe hasn't even engaged with policy before. Make sure that you're really consistent, and a lot of that comes back to remembering who you're trying to reach, who your target audience is. Then you need to also verify your argument and your evidence. So what this means is confirm that the points you're making are well supported and connected. The worst thing to do in an op-ed is to make a bold statement and then not back it up with any kind of research or build out your points. So for example, saying something like, yeah, you have to be careful what you say. We're saying something like, COP as a conference is entirely ineffective. And then you move on and you say something completely different in the next paragraph. You start talking about air pollution. But are those things actually connected? I mean, they both might be true, but one, you made a very strong statement about COP and you haven't actually backed up what you want people to take away from that, or why you're saying it. You aren't saying COP is ineffective because maybe it's really inaccessible to get to, only a few types of people and organizations can go to it. Even when you're there, a lot of young people are excluded for these and these reasons. You're just making a statement, and that can be dangerous because we don't want to give people opportunities to doubt our work. We want to make sure that when we say something, it's so well researched and so well backed up that somebody actually can go, oh no, this person has looked into this. Like, this is well reasoned, and we can trust that yeah, this is information that we can share outwardly as well. So I mean, we've all had this experience, like if somebody says something and you kind of wish, oh, you wonder why they said that. So just make sure that every point you make is backed up by research and connected to the next one. The fifth point is to make sure that it meets the publication requirements. Yes, Gabriel's saying also you have to be careful what you say about ministers' potential to be sued. So yeah, there are certain risks that you take in putting yourself out there in the media, and we're using it as a space to speak truth to power and to speak about things that we don't feel are covered enough, and that in and of itself can be a risk. It's an important risk to take most times in the work that we do, because that's what shifting narratives is about, but we can't deny that there are risks involved. And the main point is what I've been saying, is that if you're going to challenge a minister or a ministerial decision or something to do with government, you need to make sure that what you're saying is incredibly well researched and backed up, and you're not just making statements based on your personal views and opinions that cannot be shared with other people. So you want to be careful because actually you want people to take your article seriously and use it to inform the way they think about a specific topic. So having the correct tone and making sure you fact check and research is really important, and being aware of the risks that we take by putting ourselves in the public eye in this way. Okay, so the publications guidelines, you need to just make sure that if you have a publication in mind, you know what length of article do they accept. A lot of publications prefer under 1,000 words. Some publications can be strictly 800 words. Some can go up to 1,500. Just make sure that you have looked up that kind of information, that it's formatted in the correct way. Some publications like you to have a bio about the author, maybe like what organization they're from, small things like that. I've already spoken about fact checking. I can't speak about this enough because it's so important. And yeah, we really don't want to spread misinformation. It's very dangerous, especially currently, like in the age of AI. We know that this kind of fact checking and research that is robust and goes back to the source is becoming harder to find, and we need to be very ethical in our approach to being responsible citizens in the information that we share. Okay, and then ensuring readability just means make sure that you're avoiding complex language and that your sentences aren't 5 lines long and that somebody can actually read it comfortably. You can address for grammar and spelling, so that means looking out for typos, punctuation, grammar errors. There are tools that you can use for this. For many years, I've used something called Grammarly. I just put the article, it's like a plugin, and I just check it right at the end when I'm basically ready to pitch, and it checks for any typos, any small grammar errors, and it can be useful because sometimes even when you've read a piece 10 times, you can miss the smallest thing just because you're reading fast. Number 9 is to seek feedback. So again, op-eds are so collaborative because others will give you insights that you didn't even see yourself. And then, yeah, number 10 is just giving it a final review. So read it over it, sleep on it, read it fresh the next morning, make sure that all the changes are incorporated and you're ready to actually share this publicly. Okay.
Stella,
Yes.
there are 2 questions at that stage. Do you want to take them now or later?
No, we can do them now.
Okay. So Glenn says, are there any ethical considerations for writing an op-ed? I know you kind of went into that, but maybe if you have anything more to say. And Simpiwe asked where and how to seek feedback.
Okay. Yeah, so Glenn, in terms of ethical considerations, I think there are a few that I've touched on, but I think for me the biggest ones are firstly around trying your very best not to make any false claims, and that is really coming down to the research. So as I was speaking about earlier, making sure that if you are accusing somebody of something, this happens most often with ministers or government officials or entire governments themselves, that you have the research to back it up. And sometimes the research is just including as many people's perspectives as you are able to, because that makes whatever you're trying to claim a lot more truthful. And you can say, well, this many people think this, or these people have specifically spoken out against it. The other ethical consideration for me is, like I was saying earlier, in terms of when you're writing, not just about your own, something that you've personally experienced, when you're writing about something that you've noticed. So perhaps there's a specific community that is experiencing like I was saying, air pollution or a drought, for example, something like that. And in order to write effectively and ethically about somebody else's lived experience, you need to make sure that you are consulting people from that space, that you're not including your own assumptions and that you're writing from a place that is as truthful as possible. You don't want to take claim for other people's stories, because that can really cause a lot of issues when it comes down to wanting to represent people in the ways that they feel most correctly and fairly represented. It goes back to that conversation we were having earlier about why op-eds are actually important, is because often journalists cannot do as good of a job at telling a community story than somebody in that space. And what Simpiwe was saying about wanting to write about something in her community because she feels that that's the best way to represent the story. So it's just ethics around the types of stories that we take claim for and what we say about people's lives. And I think we know that quite well in the climate space as well. And then also trying not to spread misinformation and false claims. Yeah. I hope that answers the question. And then some where and how to seek feedback. I guess this depends on what stage of the writing process you're at. But for me, I think I love reaching out to colleagues, people in the writing circle, friends, if they're willing to read. And I think, Shazia, you might also want to come in here and speak about the coalition as a space to seek feedback and being able to accept drafts here too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Stella. I think, Simpiwe, I know that you join the comms working group meetings very often, and I think the comms working group should be a space where people are able to share their writing. And also, just to me, if you just want me to read your piece, you can easily WhatsApp me and say, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking about writing." I'm more than happy to go through it with you, tell you where you need research, where you need maybe to add more about your personal experience. I'm happy to check it for you, to fact check it for you, and also to help you in this next section that Stella's going to present about, even help you pitch it. The coalition is also a space where you can publish your writing. We do have a People's Power blog. So if you have something to say, you can write it for the People's Power blog or even for the newsletter. We do have this platform, and yeah, it's yours to use.
Mm-hmm.
And then, sorry, lastly, on that, I would also say the WhatsApp group itself, just as a coalition beyond just the comms working group, is a lovely place to also see what's going on in the news without actually going on the news. It's a lovely space to say, oh, this is something I could use as a news hook. Oh, this is what's happening here. That's what's happening there. Because I know sometimes we're like, how am I supposed to keep up with the trends or up with everything that's going on? Sometimes you don't have to keep up with the trends. You have to keep up with activists because activists keep up with those other things. So sometimes just keeping your finger on the pulse and the WhatsApp group allows for that as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's actually why I gave that example of Uncle Sunny earlier, because I think there have been many times in the group chat where somebody shared something and I'm like, oh, that's such a great point, or something that I haven't read about in the news before. So thanks, Gabe. I think the WhatsApp group is a great resource for sharing and for ideas. And then, yeah, I see that Mpai is saying a catchy heading or message can grab the audience's attention and make them want to read more. It's like a hook that draws them in. A good heading should be clear, concise, and relevant to the content while also being interesting and engaging. It can make a big difference in how many people read and share your article. And that is very, very true. And I think something that should have included in this presentation as well is choosing a good heading. um, it's often quite hard because you're trying to, like you were saying, include all the relevant content, but also in a very catchy way. And I think oftentimes I'll look to the introduction and the conclusion to see what could be a good way to phrase a heading, because those paragraphs often include the most important information. But yes, a heading is so important because I think a lot of us know that we click on articles because of the heading and what it tells us about what we'll read later. So thank you for adding that point. Yeah, so now we're at the point where we have a strong article and we've checked over it, gone through the editing checklist, we've given it to somebody to read to make sure that we aren't missing anything big. The next step is to find ways to share this publicly. So to choose a publisher and to pitch. And yes, Richard is saying that often the publisher can add their own heading, which has negative consequences. That does happen sometimes. It's also why I suggest that when you do submit and pitch, that you often include your own heading and maybe a few options of headings that you feel represent the article well, and including that in the pitch email. So it's very clear that this is actually what you want represented. It's a whole conversation that we can have around the ethics of newsrooms and how they sometimes shift content to serve their own purposes. But hopefully in the op-ed space, because it serves a very specific purpose, it's trying to get public opinion more represented. They tend, in my experience, not to edit content and headlines as much. But yes, in news media, it happens quite a lot. Okay, so now you have your article and you need to pitch. This is a very important step because it speaks to your target audience. Who are you wanting to reach? So you need to choose very carefully who you want to publish your article so that other people who need to read it will see it. This doesn't always have to be in the news media. As Shazia was saying, it can also go on something like a blog. And we have done that with some of our op-eds in the past, because even in your own organizations or in the coalition, we have a specific target audience. So it's just thinking about what is the right place for my article to go, that it will be read and reached by the right people. And the first thing that you need to do when thinking about choosing a publisher and how to pitch is to understand the publication. So you wouldn't just kind of spin a wheel with all the publications on the continent and stop it at that one. Usually you have a publication in mind because this allows you to understand the style, the types of articles they publish, and the audience that they reach. And you can often ask for recommendations. So I think probably the comms working group is a good place to ask, like, hey, I'm writing an article about this or an op-ed about this. What do you think a good publication would be for me to pitch to? Do you think News 24 or Daily Maverick or Mail and Guardian, or is it another one? Or maybe we just want to put it on the blog. So you do have to know about the publication. And then the next step is to write an email to the publisher. I'm going to show you an example in a moment, but these emails, I think the biggest mistake in pitching is to create a very long email that is basically just an excerpt from your article. The biggest thing about newsrooms is that people that work in newsrooms are they don't have much time. So they're going to read your email super quickly. You need to make sure that you get across the most important information in the smallest amount of words and time. So the subject line of your email is very important. It's a good idea to start your email with a very short introduction stating who you are, maybe the organization you work at, and why your op-ed matters. Again, just telling them why should they care? Why should they publish this right now? And then a very brief outline of the key points and arguments. And then a good idea for newsrooms is to connect the op-ed with something that is going on in the news media that they should care about, because that, like I said, gives them even more reason to publish right now. We'll go to an example in a moment, but the next point is to pitch to the right editor. This one is sometimes hard because sometimes you don't have the contact of the perfect person in the publication. But if you do, try and pitch to the right person. So not just like the info at Mail and Guardian. Hopefully you're trying to get to a specific journalist. So if you can reach out to your networks or your community or the coalition to see does anybody have a contact of the right person at this publication, you have a higher chance of getting a response if you're writing to the correct person. Like I said, be concise. You don't need to over-explain the article. You just need to get their attention, and hopefully they will be then interested enough to read the full article. Make sure that your article is also very polished and proofread. Proofread just means that you've read through it many times and somebody else has hopefully too, to make sure that there aren't any issues. You want to make the journalist or the editor's job really easy. You don't want to send them something that is in first or second draft form where they need to do all of the editing and polishing themselves. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to read it, maybe do a couple of formatting things just so that it fits the publication, and then publish the article. This also means that there's probably a lower chance of them changing too much if it is in an already finished form. And then the follow-up. Usually journalists are so busy that you might not even hear from them on your first reach out. So I like to leave it a couple of days and then follow up again, just to say, did you get my previous email? I think pitching is also, it's best to pitch, from my experience, a week before, and like not longer before than that, because newsrooms move so fast that they'll probably just forget that they need to publish it. So a week, sometimes I even pitch like 3 to 4 days before I want it published, because they move at that speed. They need to know if it's relevant right now and if they can go to publishing. It can be a little bit different with print because they need to send the newspaper to print. But yeah, a week before is usually a bit of a sweet spot. And then, yeah, don't be disheartened if it doesn't get picked up. You can always pitch to another publication if you don't hear from that journalist, or you can publish it on your organization's blog and still amplify it on your own media channels. The message will still get out there. And I think it is also important, like I said, to wait for the right time. So even with that cancel call, or the op-ed about the jobs that I showed you earlier, we actually wrote that many months ago and only pitched it recently around Workers' Day because we realized that that would be a good hook. But the research was done a long time ago. So thinking about things like that and retrying if you don't get word back from a publisher. This is just an example of a real pitch email that I have sent. Yes, sorry, Gabriel's also saying don't pitch multiple at the same time. Yes, don't pitch multiple articles at the same time, because you're going to just get lost in somebody's email box. They're not going to know which one to prioritize, and chances are they're not going to prioritize either, because you really don't want to spam journalists. You want to make their life as easy as possible and make working with you as easy as possible so that they build a good relationship, because I think with press, it is not just a once-off experience. If you have a good relationship with them, and you know, continuously pitch good quality op-eds and articles, that can be something that pays off in the long run and means that they want to publish you in future. So try not to pitch, or actually don't pitch multiple things at the same time. Space your things out. Yeah, this is a real pitch email that I wrote for the op-ed that I shared at the beginning on the jobs and the just transition. And as you can see, it has quite a clear subject line. And yeah, it explains clearly what the title of the article is and why we wrote it, and also connected it a bit to the moment. So like I said, we were pitching it around Workers' Day. Obviously, jobs, Workers' Day, there's a connection there. So that made it relevant at the time. And also just explaining that I'm from the African Climate Alliance, and that's, I guess, how it relates to our work. So you can see it's quite short. I don't explain even all of the main arguments of the article, and it's quite easy for Tony to then skim, read, and decide, does he want to actually read the full article, or is it not relevant for publishing? Yeah, and I think that brings me to the end of the presentation. I see there is a question in the chat already, but now's your time to ask many more questions if you do have any, if you want me to go over something again. I see that Namiso's asking, what are the best places to submit op-eds on environmental issues? Yeah, it really depends, I guess, who you're trying to reach, but the places in South Africa that we pitch to at African Climate Alliance quite a lot would be places that have specific news desks on environmental issues. So News 24, Mail and Guardian, Daily Maverick are the popular ones. Yeah, and Gabe's put them in the chat as well, because all of these have specific news desks related to climate and environmental issues. So they have large readerships around those. There's a lot of things we can say about whether we want to try and target publications that don't have environmental followings, because maybe that's going to reach people that don't already know about these things. But yeah, those are really good options. And then community papers will often pick up on it too if it impacts communities, Gabriel's saying, and that's a good point as well, that you don't always have to go for national news media. If it's something specific to the place that you live in, often you'll know the local publication that covers those kinds of issues. It's usually the one. I know for me, like sometimes I got dropped off at our post box, so we would catch up on what's happening in the area, and I know that most areas have local news media like that as well. Yeah, Shazia, I saw that your hand was up.
Yes. I just wanted to add on to that. I actually really like Ground Up for community-based stories. I think they publish really good stuff, and they're quite on the ground. So I would add Ground Up. And then just to definitely reiterate what both Stella and Gabe are saying about community papers, I think it's such a good idea to form a relationship with local journalists in your community papers, like chat to them, make sure you have a good relationship with them, and then not only will you be able to pitch your op-eds, they might also come and cover some of your events, your workshops, your pickets, that kind of a thing. I think like journalists can be good allies if you pick the right ones and you have a good relationship with them.
Absolutely. Gabe, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd say, sorry, is sometimes it's scary because you're like, oh my gosh, I have to reach out to this journalist now. But do it. They are people, and if you see someone at a protest, that's how I got many of my journalist contacts. So for those who don't know, I started as an activist, but then I went into communications for about 8 years, and in that time, a big part of it was really going up during a protest to some journalist and saying, can I please have your contact so that I can let you know when other things like this happen? And then they'll tell me, oh, sorry, I'm just covering for someone, but here's a contact you can use. And then also just to note, the CJC does also have a decent community paper media list from across South Africa. So um, if you'd like, Shazia won't share it to everybody, but if you come forward and you'd like to pitch things, we can also let you know, cool, these are the community papers in this area that we think would be relevant and more and support in that way. But yeah, 100% take it out there. I mean, some of my closest friends are journalists, and whenever I pick up the phone, they'll take my story. And sometimes you just have to build that relationship. Not an extractive one, but they need content, you have a story.
Yeah, I think that's the point, is that actually journalists are also always looking for content. So it helps them with their job if you make it easy to them and bring the story to them, and you have spoken to the right people and you have the facts covered, you're doing them a favor too. So it's a two-way relationship. I see Eddie saying, I think another important thing is to build a good relationship with journalists. And on my side, I prefer freelance journalists. It's good to know. Yeah, I think freelance journalists are also a good avenue to try. Sometimes it's harder to find them because they're not linked to a specific organization. But yes, if you have one, hold them dear, because they're probably a great contact to have. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, and comrades, don't be scared. This is your opportunity to ask Stella questions. It can be about the process. It can be about anything that she presented earlier. It can just be about how does it feel as when you're writing it or when you get it published or something of that nature. Uncle Temba, I see your mic.
Well, I have a question. You know, how do we protect our information? Because you know that some of us as information givers, some of us get killed or get kidnapped and all that type of thing. And you know, you understand what I'm saying? How can we protect information and
Yes. Nomfundo, are you replying to this or is this another question?
Yeah, that's my question.
I'm so sorry, Stella. I think Uncle Temba just hit it on the nail. I was about to ask myself, in fact, good day. Forgive me for my bad manners. I think just to add on what he's saying, I mean, we continue to just make relationships with a different whole of lots of stakeholders. But then how do we make sure we protect ourselves? Because surveillance is a thing, and to make sure that we protect ourselves from being vulnerable to security injustices or the like. So I think the reason I put my hand up is the fact that so many times we're making relationships and it's important, but then how do we make sure that the people we're working with are credible enough for us to give this information? Because I mean, information can be misconstrued, you get in the firing lines. So I mean, we're activists, and how do we make sure that even our lives are protected from the information that we're giving to specific people, may it be freelance or even just journalists from big media houses. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I know, Gabriel, you probably have a lot of thoughts on this as well. So do you want to try and answer it?
Yeah, a big thing that's often out there is the last thing you want is to put a target on your head or someone else's head. And the reason that I've got the experience in this is just because I think the biggest thing that's often happening is I think the very first op-ed that ACA wrote that I was a part of years ago, 5 years, 6 years ago, was one on police brutality during lockdown. And that scared a lot of the young people who were like, what if we now get targeted? And it wasn't just young people in Cape Town, it was young people in Gauteng and KZN writing this as well. And a big thing was actually, do you know what? By putting ourselves out there, we make ourselves a public figure. We make ourselves public to the, visible to the public, which means if anything happens to us, we are still seen. And then at the same time, by making yourself visible to the public, you also put yourself at risk. Um, and so we did have an honest conversation, and we weighed the risks. We said, cool. Have we said anything here that's not already based in fact? Have we said anything here that's not credible? Have we said anything here that could expose where either of us live or are situated? No, fine, it's okay. This is our debut as activists in the journalism space or in the writing space, so it's okay. However, oftentimes what you'll find is that you do need to be a bit more conscious about how you write or where you're writing from. It's also when you're doing interviews on the radio or in person. You don't want to say something that accidentally exposes your location or something of that nature. But at the same time, you don't want to limit or restrict yourself. So, uh, three things I would say, if I could come up with three things, would be one, make sure that you are being quite factual in what you're saying, because with a lot of facts behind it, and if you're linking quite a lot of facts to your piece, it's almost as though you're making an observation about more information that's there, and it's less you're bringing it to the light yourself. Two, speak to a lawyer or a legal professional or someone with writing experience who can help curb what you've said. So you still get your message out there, but it allows you to also be a bit more savvy, a bit more smart in how you're putting it out there. So instead of saying, the legal working group, exactly, Shazia, you can take it there and let Rob read over it, and say, cool, by me saying this about Gwede Mantashe, am I going to get in trouble? And then Rob is like, no, actually, just put the word allegedly in front. And with the word allegedly in front of it, you'll be fine. Or maybe Rob will say, take Gwede's name out and talk about the DMRP, the department as a whole. And then the last thing I would say is, if you're really in a situation where you could be at risk, especially for community papers and more, and you're talking about something as sensitive as our energy transition in South Africa, you are maybe able to also say, hey, could someone else pitch this on my behalf? So long as the story is out there, I don't care that my name is on it or not. I'll know I wrote it. But could someone else put it under their name? Or you could ask the journalist, hey, could you put it out anonymously? And go through that direction, or as your organization as a whole, rather than you as an individual. Yeah.
And you are within your rights to also ask journalists to not include your name, like if you give comment, if you're commenting on an article, ask them not to include your name, where you're from, all of that. So you do have certain rights within the media as well, but the points that Gabe mentioned are very important. I saw your hand was up, Shazia.
No, I think I'm covered. I think this is, yeah, it's a really important question because as activists, we are in the business of speaking truth to power. And if you're going to say something about an injustice or about corruption, you are going to ruffle some feathers. So yeah, just exactly what Gabe and Stella said.
Sorry, and then last thing I'd say, just on that point, because I feel like I wasn't being clear enough on that point about when you're visible, it puts you at risk, but also helps you. Is just so uh, for example, there's an Indian climate activist called Disha Ravi a few years ago who was speaking out against some of the injustices that were happening around farming and more in India. And a big thing that happened was she was detained, and Greta then put out a statement that was like, hey, why is this activist being held? And she was then released. And because Disha was then seen across the world, it became very difficult for her to remain detained. So there's a plus side of it, but also a negative.
Yeah, there is a lot to talk about injustices. Some of us have been exposed to this harassment and all this stuff. And some of us, of course, we are marked. And the work that we are doing, nobody likes it in case. That's the last thing I wanted. But it's all right. The struggle is a struggle. It's fine.
Yes, Uncle Tim, but the struggle is the struggle, but we must be safe when we're struggling too, because we must take care of ourselves and our comrades as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, especially other people and our families.
Cool. Are there any more questions for Stella? I love how we immediately jumped into um, the depth of things, guys. No? Cool. Stella, do you have anything you'd like to add that maybe you felt you didn't? Oh, I
Oh,
see. Let me see.
Yes.
I want to ask that can I be held legally responsible for my readers' reactions to my piece?
So, Section 16, if I'm not mistaken, of our Constitution allows for us an element of freedom of speech so long as we do not incite violence, hate, or war. There's a lot more in depth there, but so long as you don't call for um, an overthrow or this, so you can call for there's certain responsibilities, and I think that's also what Stella started to allude to about ethics. Is you are responsible to some degree if you have put things out there that pushes a narrative that is harmful or damaging. For example, oftentimes you'll see with Operation Valumgoti, Operation Plug the Hole was um, the narrative that was spun was a very xenophobic one, was a very anti-black one, and that then pushed a lot of hate and violence towards non-South Africans, and that can be a very damaging thing. And so there is a level of accountability that comes to it. But if someone read your article and it didn't explicitly incite violence, that's not necessarily your responsibility, but it could be.
Yep, go ahead, Shazia.
Oh yeah, and lastly, not necessarily on the legal side, but you could just attract some haters. If you're saying something that's a little bit controversial, you are, as Gabe and Stella said, you're putting yourself out there and as like a public profile. So people could start attacking you on social media or something. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind, even if you're not held legally responsible, or even if you followed all the rules, there could just be someone that doesn't like your opinion or feels threatened by what you said. And then it opens you up to a little bit of exposure with maybe a hater or two, but that's just part of the process.
There'll also probably be many people that agree with you, but because hate is always louder, those are probably the people that you'll hear from. So yeah, it's definitely a
Lastly,
reality.
if you are threatened by anything that gets put out, you can inform the CJC Secretariat and we'll connect you to the relevant support systems. A lot of our members have different programs that support activists, whether it be legal, physical, narrative, or more. So please know that if you are in risk, you are able to reach out to the Coalition for support.
Yes, I think the biggest lesson from all of this is that article writing is very collaborative, and that is important for many reasons, not only to write a strong article, but also to make sure that you are not putting yourself at too much risk and that you have the support that you need if you are taking a certain kind of risk. Yeah, and I think that I just wanted to leave you with a practice task. It's not obviously compulsory or something that you have to do within a specific timeline, but it's just so that you can have the chance to put the things we've been speaking about into practice if you would like to try it out. So the practice task is to use the qualities and structure of the op-ed that I've been discussing, and to choose a topic that is close to home for you. Try to break it down into those 8 qualities as a starting point for an article. And I'm sure Shazia will be sharing the recording and everything with everybody, so you'll have that on hand. But if you would like to give this a try, and if you would like to submit it for us to take a look at, then and for feedback, then you're welcome to use these contact details, and we can begin the process of helping you to formulate the article. But yeah, I think that is everything from me. I'll just put this up on the screen for anybody. Oh, Shazia's put it in the chat as well. The takeaway task, as well as the links to the tutorials on our African Climate Alliance YouTube that I mentioned earlier, which basically is what I've covered today, but in a lot more detail. So if you want to watch those, that's also available. Yeah, I think that's all that I had to say. Shazia, is there anything from your side?
No, just to say thank you so much, Stella. This has been so valuable. Thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and skills. And yeah, we really, here at the Climate Justice Coalition, we really appreciate what you've done for our members.
It's such a pleasure. It was an honor and very fun to speak about the work for a while on a Wednesday. So thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining. Oh, lastly, Mutlatsi, do you just want to be brief?
Yes, no, on a lighter note, comrade, I didn't know you look so much like Comrade Bruce. The picture.
I'm using Comrade Boosie's Zoom account. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Evening, Shazia.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, Stella.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.